Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Amanda Augustine. I'm a certified professional career coach and Careerminds resident career expert. So, my focus is helping people and organizations, of course, navigate career transitions and the changing world of work. And I'm really excited to be moderating today's conversation. So, a couple things to note is that at the end of the conversation, we are going to leave time to answer as many of your questions as you may have. So, please use the questions pane that's located in the upper right hand corner to submit any questions you want at any time. Keep in mind, we're going to hold them until we get through the main conversation, and then we're going to go into that area and start answering as many as we can. Now, for those of you who may be new to Careerminds, we are a leading global workforce solutions partner, and we help organizations support their people at every stage of the talent life cycle. So that includes everything from workforce intelligence and career development to redeployment and outplacement. And our approach is what we like to call people first, but tech enabled. So it's this really beautiful blend of the data, the modern tools, and the one on one coaching that helps organizations navigate workforce change while supporting their employees through all the moments of transition. Now, that was a mouthful. I hope we all got it. We're here to support you. You need it any stage, come reach out to us. But that's really what's going to bring us to today's conversation. I think this is such an important conversation, and I'm so excited we get to delve deeper into it. Um, so, I think for so many organizations, or at least maybe in the past, the layoffs were often treated as this single moment in time. It's the announcement, it's all the difficult conversations that follow, and then there's the restructuring plan. But anyone who's lived through one of these, or as I assume many of you on this chat today have led through one, we know the story doesn't end there. And in many ways, the hardest part actually begins after the announcement. This is when the people who remain are trying to make sense of what just happened and what that means for them going forward. So, to better understand what's happening inside organizations during and after layoffs, CareerMinds recently surveyed 500 HR leaders and 500 employees across the US. And here are a few of the things that really stood out. 57% of HR leaders say their organization is likely to conduct layoffs in the next 12 months. More than half of the organizations are saying, yeah, it's probably happening this year. At the same time, 90% of employees say they feel confident that their job will be secure over the next year. So I think right away, we see this disconnect between what organizations are planning and what employees expect. But, what I find even more interesting when it comes to the data is what's happening after the layoffs take place. So keep this in mind. Nearly 40% of the employees said that layoffs negatively affected their perception of their employers, and 40% of HR leaders say layoffs increased voluntary turnover. And this is typically among the high performing employees. The ones you kept, the ones you made sure made it through the layoffs, are the ones that are looking around and going, I think it might be time to leave. So we know, long story short, layoffs rarely end when people leave. And they create these ripple effects, what we've been calling the aftershock, that are going to shape the trust, the engagement, and the retention long after the restructuring itself is over. So that's what we're here to explore today. And to help me unpack what this actually means and what's happening inside organizations during this period, I am so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Chris Stanzione. So I met Chris more than a decade ago when I was hosting job mobile HR events around the country for the ladders. This was long before they were just called ladders. So let me tell you a little bit about Chris. Chris is the founder and managing partner of 360 Talent, where he helps growing businesses build scalable HR infrastructures and high performing talent acquisition strategies. He brings more than 2 decades of experience in global recruiting leadership roles at organizations including Adecco, SunTrust, Southern Company, and Cox Enterprises. He's also a SHRM SCP, a certified Scrum Master, and a contributor to the Forbes Human Resources Council. And he's deeply passionate about innovation in recruiting, AI-driven talent insights, and advancing mental health in the workplace. Big plus there. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Amanda. I couldn't be more honored and excited to talk about this topic. I'm very passionate about it, primarily because I've lived through it.
Tell me a
I've
little bit
been,
about that. Yeah.
yeah. So I have been downsized.
Yeah.
I've been in the room when the decisions for downsizing were being made. I've personally been impacted. Members of my family, my wife have been impacted over the years, and it's almost
Yeah.
like 10 years ago or so. you you might know a few people that have been laid off over the years, but now almost every single human in America knows somebody that has been laid off over the last 3 to 5 years. And
Yeah,
that's
that's
a
fair.
dramatic shift just in the psychology of what it means to think about your employment security. And so I'm just really passionate to unpack this topic, talk about some of these things, and really get them out in the open.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. And I know you have so many pearls of wisdom to drop on us. So let's get started with what tends to happen after the announcement. Because from the outside, it can sometimes look like that's the hardest moment. It's just the
Yeah.
layoff itself. But the real leadership challenge begins once that dust settles. So,
Yeah.
from your experience, what tends to happen? Like, tell me about what's happening in the weeks and months after that layoff.
Well, before I go there, I want to kind of bring it back to the pre-decisioning, right?
I love it.
And
Yeah.
we always think of layoffs as sort of being this finance-led, function. And CFO says, "Hey, we've got to cut. We can't do it anymore. We've got to pull back, and we need to make X percentage or X number of headcount cuts." And they basically just say, "Go figure it out. We need the numbers to match. Go figure it out." And then business leaders kind of get this, okay, I've got to cut two heads. Who are my two heads? And there's no real well-defined, in most cases, well-defined structure as to, tying it back to the workforce planning. What are the
Yeah.
goals we need? What are the skills we need? And then looking at performance. Instead of using this broad brush first in, your last in, first out, methodology. We have to save our most senior people. Those are all emotional things as opposed to really pragmatic, systematic things. And so the reason why I talk about that is because after the layoffs occur, what happens is your employee trust is immediately dropped, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a statistic here in the report that you guys did that was talking about how 40% plus of the remaining employees really don't feel safe anymore.
Yeah.
They started to fall into disengagement. And one of the ways that you can do that is through communication around why, how the decisions were made, and how you are, as an organization, especially from an HR leadership standpoint, going to help these people go through this emotional transition of, hey, I mean, the report says over 90% of employees think their job is safe.
Yeah.
And if, the data shows us that almost 60% of HR people say, we got layoffs coming in the next 12 months, there's a massive disconnect. So when the layoff occurs, the employees feel betrayed, even if they're safe.
Yeah.
So a lot of it lands with communication. A lot of it, it is on the planning of the comms, and it's not just a town hall. It's not just a release statement. It's
Yeah.
really empathetic, one-on-one, heavy lifting of managers talking to their teams and saying, "How are you doing? Do you understand
Yeah.
it?" And really providing the clarity to help them. And that takes time. It takes energy. Not a lot of managers want to do that.
Yeah.
Especially if they were the ones, making the decisions to do the cuts. It's like, look, I had to go. I went through this. I did the hard part. Now let's just get back to work. And that's probably one of the least effective ways of maintaining that engagement or trying to bring that engagement back up.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not just managing the comms leading up to the actual event and of course after that event, but in order to be able to communicate, here's how we went about deciding who was being laid off, you actually have to, as an organization, come together and figure out what is that process or what is that decision, the factors involved. If you can do that and with clarity, you're much more likely to keep everyone on the same page as you and in a better mindset, I guess, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, when you're communicating. Because if it's just we just chose who we liked. We just made sure we chose the people who've been here the longest, or the people, that sort of thing to stay. Then that's not necessarily going to help any messaging if that's how your process went about.
Absolutely. So for the HR leaders in the room that have really solid, well-defined workforce plans, where they're meeting with the business leaders quarterly, they're tied in. These are the triggers that will accelerate hiring or decelerate hiring. It's the same thing. If revenue drops by 20%, the CFO says, "Hey, it's time we got to cut, 8% or 10% of our workforce." You know,
Yeah.
what are the triggers that reverse engineer the workforce plan?
Yeah.
We may not need
Yeah.
as many customer service, and we may not need one product manager, but we probably don't need to kill two product manager roles, right? So it's a balance, and it's got to be engineered appropriately to make sense for people, so that when we talk about right sizing the organization, that's a term that we
Yeah.
used to use many years ago, because there was a lot of thought and process into it, as opposed to what has now become the norm, which
Yeah.
is layoffs are a financial tool to increase profitability.
Yeah.
And that's what's really turning into this snowball effect of significant disengagement after the layoffs occur for those that are remaining. And
Yeah.
that's where probably the biggest work starts to kick in.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree. It reminds me actually of a conversation that we did in a previous panel discussion where we were talking about the better or the better defined, or how, the better defined your roles are, and the better clarity or visibility you have into each of your employees' skill set, even beyond the role they're providing for you today, or they're fulfilling for the organization today, the smarter you can be about, to your point, right sizing, because it could mean redeployment within the organization if you have a better sense of what everyone's able to do, and if there are also shifting priorities in terms of the business and in terms of what skill sets are most important and most valued by the company at that moment.
I'll give you an example. So
Yeah.
this is a real life case example. We were working with a client, and they had to go through some downsizing, and we helped them do it. And they presented their first list of people they wanted to. And we did exactly what you're just talking about, which is look at a skills inventory. And what we found out is one of the people that have been selected, who was not in a technology role at all, had over the last 12 months taken courses on AI prompt engineering, and was developing tools on his own for fun that were business application tools in Claude AI, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
had we not done that deep skill assessment, because by the way, that client was having a hard time finding people that had the industry knowledge and had the interest and ability to build these things. And so it was like, no, are they a full blown engineer yet? No. But why are we going to let go of somebody that knows our company, knows our industry,
Yes.
knows our culture,
Exactly.
knows
Yeah.
everything about what we do? They're a good producer, but that role isn't needed anymore. How do we
Yep.
dig in and find other opportunities without investing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in reskilling and deployment?
Yep.
And maybe that's the best case, but that's a long-term strategy. But look at the
Yep.
inventory of what you have today. you know and I would also include, ask people, what are you
Yes.
good at?
Yes.
you know
Yep.
Help them build out that skills inventory. And it's when it's treated in this very hush hush private way of, we can't let this get out at all, it's a secret room that and every HR leader's been in that,
Yeah.
right? you know
Yeah.
Here's who's in the tent. That's what we say, right? Here's who's
Yeah.
in the tent. And
Circle of trust at this time. Yep.
yeah, circle of trust. And it's generally okay. We've got bad things that we don't want anybody to know, but there's a way of crafting that messaging to indicate early, warning signs, such as being transparent around, our revenue dropped the last 3 months in a row. We're operating at much leaner margins because of that. We're doing everything we can to save jobs, but we also might need to look at skill redeployment. That's a positive message.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
tough message, but it's a real message,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
it doesn't come as the shock when when layoffs do have to happen, it doesn't come as big of a shock. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And that's something I would encourage everybody to look at. So, CareerMinds has a fairly new platform available. It's called Workforce Intelligence. And it's basically there to do exactly what Chris is talking about, to inventory all the skills, both the soft and the hard, role specific, and anything outside of an individual's specific role that they're interested in working on. Maybe it was in a previous job, or maybe it's something they're doing on the side. So then you can use certain AI models to determine if I need to shift one way or another, how can I rearrange my workforce in the best way possible. And so that's something I definitely recommend talking about with with your teams, but also then using something like that. If you know that, hey, we're talking about in the next 4 to 6 months, 4 to 6 weeks, whatever it might be, that we're going to probably have to do some layoffs. Well, what can we do now to get better transparency, better visibility
That's right.
into our employees? Now,
And one thing on that note before we
yeah,
move on is a lot of HR leaders, maybe not our audience today, but a lot of HR leaders have a real obstacle in asking for money,
yeah,
right? And especially once the
yeah,
CFO says we tighten the purse strings and we've got to start doing thinking about layoffs and it's got to happen and everything. The last thing that the HR leader thinks is natural is let's go invest in another tool.
yeah.
And you've got to make that
Fair.
business case, right? To be able to say,
Yeah,
if we're going to do X, preserve brand value, preserve culture, preserve engagement, it's going to cost us Y.
yeah.
And then you get
Do
the
you?
financial benefit of the
Yeah,
layoff. But if you don't, the cost of that brand value degradation, think about a company that's built a brand for 7, 10, 20, 50 years, and suddenly that
yeah,
brand is just decimated on Glassdoor,
yeah.
right?
Well,
That's
and
what
even
happened with
I
the
just
company
think
I
about
worked
it.
with.
We know
What's that?
how many. I said, you know what? It just turns to me about the data showed 40% of employees, the ones you kept around, the ones that are considered, the high value top talent, 40% of them are going to go for the door. So you're losing that top talent. And if they're in roles that you needed filled, think about the cost it is to then rehire those positions
Yeah.
with your brand reputation now jeopardized, or now, uh I don't want to
Also
say
on that
tainted,
note,
but
a lot of
compromised.
yeah, yeah, and also on
Yeah.
that note, a lot of companies, in their talent acquisition strategies, target what are called boomerang employees.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people that used to work here. Well, if you've had poor exit experiences, those access to boomerang employees becomes very, very limited,
Yeah.
right?
That's
And
fair.
this is really, really critical in unique industries. So think of like, high precision medical devices, or industries that have, oil and gas that are large but are very, very well networked and connected.
Yeah.
That could spread like wildfire.
Oh,
So
100%.
yeah.
100%. I want to talk a little bit about the employees who are there. And we know that many of them then question whether they're going to stay. So I know you've talked to plenty of those employees that are going through those periods of change. And, you and I talked about this concept of the retention paradox. So I'm curious from your perspective, what you've learned, what are the concerns they're really feeling? What are they saying versus what are you finding out privately? And what is something leaders can do to address it more proactively so that it doesn't come back to bite them?
So I want to give you a personal example. And it was during COVID. I was working for a great company, and we had to go through reductions because our revenue had dropped by, from a corporate standpoint, by over 40% in the first 2 months of COVID. Yeah, and a lot of companies had to make very, very difficult decisions during that
Yeah.
time. And Did we handle them perfectly? Did we handle them poorly? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think they were handled with humanity and a lot of grace. But what happened was, the team that I was leading had, been from about 100 people or so down to about 40. And what we found with that 40 was they had survivor guilt. Why me? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
grateful to have a job, but why me? And now I've got to learn 3 other people's jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm still having the stress and the pressure, but now it feels more compressed. And if that relief isn't given and there's no roadmap to that relief, and your remaining employees that have stayed are kind of stuck in that this is now your new normal, that creates a resentment. And then it goes from guilt to resentment, and resentment leads to anger. And, that's not what you
Rage
want with
applying.
an employee.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody says, I really want a team of angry employees.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants that,
Yeah.
right?
Let's all be miserable together. That sounds fun.
Well, I think a lot of us
Yeah.
do that, but
Yeah.
in terms of, when you're talking about putting together high productive teams and teams that really feel engaged with their culture, and, and I talk about engagement a lot, right? And there's a difference between walking in and doing a job and walking in and saying, I want to see this place get better, and that's the engagement I think most employers are looking for. And, when you're dealing with these layoff situations, you just throw these roadblocks. I'm not saying companies shouldn't do that, but we should really start thinking about, if they need to be done, how are they going to be done? And what's the messaging, right? So that those
Yeah.
that are left over with that paradox, are able to find a way through it,
So
that, hey, this is
let
temporary.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's talk about that communication piece a bit, because I think there's two things at play, right? There's one thing is we need the leaders to step up and do things that are genuinely going to help employees regain their direction, their confidence. You also need, at the manager level, you need their help to stabilize the teams. And HR needs to support both of these groups to make all that happen. So I guess this is a two-parter. One, how can HR best support both leadership as well as the management level when it comes to helping everyone regain some direction, feel a little better, stabilize things? But also, what kind of comms, when you talk about the communication, what is that message that they should be sending, assuming they can, deliver what they're preaching?
So for the first part, I would say show up as a business partner. Don't show
Mm.
up as an HR leader. Show up as a business leader. You've got to speak the business's language. It's numbers, it's growth, it's margins. And if you don't know what the key levers that drive your business are as an HR leader, you need to, right? You don't have to get an MBA. You don't have to know how to read the actual, monthly financial reports, but you need to understand the levers. If this happens, if we increase revenue by 10%, what are the organizational impacts needed? Training, people, support, policies, things like that. As companies grow into multi-state jurisdictions, things like that. So all those things to consider. You've got to be able to, not just from the HR side and compliance side, because no business leader wants to hear about compliance. Nobody cares. No business leader wants to hear about the emotions of the people, except maybe your CFO or your CEO, right?
Mm.
Because your CFO doesn't. That's not their job. Your head of sales doesn't. That's not their job, right? But the head of HR, it's their job. But they don't need to bring that as the people don't feel like X into a business meeting. So you've got to lead with the business numbers and be realistic enough to separate the emotion out of it. And when I've seen that happen, that HR leader, CPO, CHRO, whoever's in that head of HR role, tends to get elevated in those conversations. And so the voice starts to get heard, as opposed to the HR leader in the room who's being told, here's what we need you to go implement.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I would
Well,
show
that
up for
makes
number
sense. Yeah.
one. Number two, around communication, it's actually interesting. The study that your company did showed that 83% of HR leaders felt like their comms nailed it, right? And
Yeah.
only 64% of the employees felt like it actually resonated. So there's a gap,
Yeah.
right? There's a
Yeah.
19% gap. And is 19% massive? No, but you're really shooting for 100% here.
Yeah.
You want your employees to know that you care. And
Yeah.
a written communication statement is, and I'm not a comms guy. I'm an HR guy, but I know enough to know that if I think that what I'm writing is really good, it's going to appeal to people like me.
That's fair. That's a great thing to think about as you're writing these.
So you got to
I
take perspectives from your
Yeah.
hourly wage worker, who's just started working on a warehouse line or working in a, production environment, all the way up to, the senior level manager that may not fully be in that tent, right? And aware,
Yeah.
all of that has to land in a place that, leads them to a place of psychological safety.
Mhm.
Because what you want to do is embed that psychological safety. It's safe to work here. We're going to go through tough times together. And
Yep.
we may have to make difficult decisions, but we're here with you, and not just say, we're all in this together. In most layoffs, it doesn't look like we're all in this together. It looks like a lot of the top echelon of the company is still there.
Yep.
So, and that sends a
Mhm.
really big signal, you know. And I've
Yeah.
worked with organizations that have had layoffs, and the people that remain are asking, we feel a little top heavy down.
Mm.
We used to have 15 VPs. We did a layoff, and now we have 15 VPs.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
you've got to be aware of that. It's written, it's verbal, it's structural communication, right? It's
Yeah.
all those elements that have to land. If you're going to use a reduction in force or a layoff to then reorganize the
Yeah.
department, which happens a lot, like it can't just be, and we're reorganizing finance under, Susie Smith or Larry Jones. There's got to be the reason. Here was why we consolidated. Here was the betterment of it, so that people, if they want to know, they've got the details. It takes more documentation, though, right? It takes more
Yes.
work on, for us in HR to do that. But
That
I
makes
think
sense.
about it as investment work and say, would I rather the HR function be spending time 6 months from now dealing with employee relations issues, recruiting issues, branding issues, attrition issues, poor performance reviews, and sort of the mess? Or would I rather put that time early up front and say, in the days, weeks leading up to that layoff, what's the infrastructure we're putting in place to support everybody from a comm standpoint, from an alignment standpoint, all those
Yeah.
things.
No, I think that's so important. There's something that you said that I think is really interesting, and I want to explore a little bit more. So you were talking about we're talking to the leaders. We need to be a business partner. We need to talk the numbers. We need to talk the business priorities. But when you're helping support the managers who are now having the one-on-ones with their remaining team members, I'm gonna venture to guess that that's when you have to show the emotion. That's when the conversation, the support is not just going to be on here's the comms and here's the business case for what we should be doing. So, can you tell me a little bit more about what are some great ways that HR could support the managers, whether that's, I don't know, training, if it's, going through, I don't want to say a mock interview, but basically role playing some of these conversations for managers who've never had to go through this. And I'm talking about, yes, the layoffs, but really also the one on ones that need to take place after those individuals have left and the remaining team is sitting there looking around with big scared eyes.
So we've known each other a long time, and everybody that knows
Yeah.
me knows I'm a highly emotional guy, right? I tune into
No.
people's emotions. I
Yeah.
cry at baby commercials. Every
That
Thanksgiving at Publix, the Publix commercials, they've got me, in tears. And so one of the questions I ask managers from the get-go is, how comfortable are you talking to somebody at an emotional level?
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to get a litmus test for, I'm not. This is work. This is business too. Yes, I'm absolutely, I'm
Yeah.
connected to my people. I know their children's names and, and all that. And so there's spectrum there, because there's not a one size fits all,
Yep.
right? There's a
Yep.
basic messaging around it. You've got to connect. You've got to listen. You've got to ask probing questions. You've got to be able to have good answers for those questions. So the mock interview style or the mock one-on-one style is a fantastic way. And I don't think it's just a document you can send out. I think it's a 30-minute
No.
one-on-one with the manager, and an
Yeah.
HR leader to be able to say, we're going to walk you through this because it's going to be tough work.
Yeah.
You know,
And it's such a different environment now because we have so many organizations now that are fully remote,
yeah,
hybrid, partially remote, depending on where they live at this point. And so I think there's even additional coaching to go into those individuals who are going to need to have these conversations via video instead of in person. Obviously, we're trying. I mean, I think this goes without saying. We're avoiding just an email. We're avoiding just a phone call. Truly, we want
no,
to have a meeting and look people in the eyes, even if it's through a screen, because this is a loss. To your point, we talk about there's so many words that we associate with layoffs that are also associated with grief and loss
yes,
and those sort of things.
yes, absolutely. And I'll go back to the example of the company I was with during COVID. Um, Not everybody did this, but I made the decision in my organization that when we had to lay off somebody, their manager and me were on the call. And it wasn't
Yep.
because I needed to be there to oversee the conversation. It was because I wanted them to see that a senior leader was also willing to be on that call and listen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And these were for the remaining employees. So
Yeah. I think
they
that's
were
important to
able to
point
feel
out.
supported in more than just a one-on-one. And yeah, it took a lot of time.
I bet.
It
Yeah.
was 50 conversations or so. But at the same time, the remaining team that I had was phenomenal because they knew we cared.
Yeah.
They knew I as a leader cared.
You earn the
And so
trust.
that's why I talk about being in it with them, right? It's not
Yeah.
just word, we're all in this together. Like,
Yeah.
to sit there and listen and see the tears come up, and you know them going through the, oh my gosh, what am I going to do, and I'm pregnant, or my husband just lost his job, or whatever that is,
Yes.
and be there for them in that moment, and
Yeah.
not dismiss them with a letter.
Yeah.
Here's a 6-month severance. So sorry this happened. Here's
Yeah.
an outplacement or not, because most companies, about half of them, don't do anything, and basically just say, you're on your own.
Good luck. Yeah.
Thanks for being here for 10 years.
And I think that's important. It's so funny. My head automatically always shifts back to what are we saying to those who are leaving when we want to focus the conversation on those that are staying. But I will say that going through that motion, it's not like these individuals aren't talking to each other. It's not like your work bestie isn't going to call or Slack or text you and let you know exactly what went down when they were laid off. So if you are a remaining employee, you're going to know exactly how everyone was treated or everyone that you were close with. And so you're going to feel that loss of your support system within the organization, but how you treat the people that are leaving also truly impacts those that end up staying behind. Um,
So I want to throw out,
yeah,
before we run out of time for it, a radical idea. I try to bring one radical idea to every single time I'm given an opportunity to.
lay it on
And
me.
the radical idea is a mindset shift for HR.
Okay,
And
tell me more.
there is still a bias in the employment market for people that have been laid off. It's a
Mm,
negative bias. So when applying for a new job and you were at ABC company for 7 years and now you've been laid off, there's a stigma associated with it. It still exists. It shouldn't exist, because the way that companies are leveraging layoffs now for business reasons and not
yep.
performance related reasons. And the radical idea is, how can we in HR give our exiting employees almost like a certificate of good work,
Mhm.
and it's being able to say, we don't want to give references, we don't want to give information, but almost a letter saying, Chris Stanzione was laid off due to business reasons and had nothing to do with his performance, signed the HR leader.
Mm.
Because
You know what?
if you're laying people off for performance, you need to tell them they're being laid off for performance,
Right.
right?
Right.
And not hide it behind a business decision. But if it's
Yeah.
truly a business decision, give people, more tools to go land in their next job,
Yeah.
as
And
opposed to
I have
having
to
to
say,
explain it.
no, I have to say that I think it's also just helpful for the individual to move on because
Yeah.
I work with so many individuals who've been displaced, who have, have been impacted by a layoff or workforce reduction, whatever we want to call it, right? And as much as you try and drill it into their head that layoffs by definition are not necessarily tied to your performance, they're still always going to say, yes, but there were 15 people on my team and they got rid of 5 of us. So obviously we were the 5 worst. And unfortunately that mindset is always going to follow. But sometimes they just need to hear there wasn't anything you did. This is just how it
Yeah.
is, sort of situation to help them rebuild. So I do think that can be really powerful. I'm
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw out my one. I don't know how radical it is, but it's something that I personally experienced, and this was years and years and years ago. Got we're talking, the big bubble burst. So
Oh,
not
wow.
to deem myself, but it was a while ago. And in thinking back, I think it was pretty unconventional at the time, but what great insight from that leadership and HR team that with those who remained behind the day after the layoffs occurred. Now, granted, we were all in person at that point, so it made things easier, but they brought a grief counselor on site. They put us all in a big conference room and had a grief counselor present to us and basically open the door if anyone wanted to talk to this individual for things that went well beyond the HR leaders, paycheck and experience. They had somebody on hand that they brought
Right.
in to help navigate those emotions because as much as you want to say business is business, it was a business decision, it's an emotional experience, right? Even for those, especially for those who also stay. And I think that that's so important that we're talking about those that are still left behind that are trying to grapple with what's next and is my job secure? Or is this just the first wave? And, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop.
And everything you just said ties back to the exact conversation I was saying about HR being a business leader in the room
Yeah.
and being able, because a lot of people think, well, HR is the grief counselor. I,
Yeah.
I didn't go to school to be a grief counselor,
No,
and I'm not,
no.
I'm not qualified. I'm not prepared. I'm not prepared to protect my own peace in that moment, right? So
Yeah.
I would need to be an effective HR leader. I need to bring in resources and tools that I'm not good at or my
Yeah.
team's not designed for, right?
Yeah.
To then pick that
Yeah.
up. And that's going to be part of that business case too. So it's building the whole thing as opposed to, just one at a time. And that's
Yeah.
absolutely phenomenal. And there's plenty of those, over the last 5 years since COVID hit, a lot of companies, services, providers have been able to make that available for hybrid and remote workforces. So it is more
I love
accessible
that.
than it was even
Yeah.
5 years ago.
Yeah, and I would even think about what is your oh I'm gonna screw up the acronym. I know I am. What PEO maybe is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
Whatever benefits you have as an organization. I mean, so many of them have partnerships or access to, you know, therapy and counseling and things of that nature. This would also be a time to remind everybody who's still there what is currently available that you may have not been taking advantage of before that might also help you through this time. So in some cases, you're just using and leveraging what you already have available that frankly everyone kind of forgets about until there's a moment where it becomes more necessary or there's, a particular event in an individual or the organization.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, PEOs offer that typically as a comprehensive benefit package, but any benefits that have an EAP associated with it,
EAP, that's what I
or
was trying to think of. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
at the employee assistance programs. But
Yes.
then
Yes.
also because PEOs are professional employer organizations and they're a little bit different, but
Yeah.
you know, in those plans, you do have those benefits. You do have counselor sessions. You have access to that at no cost to the employee. And so those are great tools and resources to use that may already be included. Most major medical plans, though, that I've seen over the last year and a half to 2 years when doing client renewals, they're including
Yeah.
mental health benefits now too.
Love that.
So
I
we're
love that.
starting to see it, and I couldn't be happier because, when we take care of our people holistically, financially with, good, I hate the word work-life balance, but work-life integration, right?
There you go. I like
Where
that.
I'm able to still be a human being, but also be a worker, right?
Yeah.
That work-life integration piece, and then also the health piece of it. With this mental
Yeah.
health, it's physical health, it's being able to have people that show up to work, feeling great,
Yeah.
and purpose.
I think that is the perfect segue to the last question I want to ask you before we move on to our audience's questions. And it's something I think we both agree doesn't get talked about nearly enough. And it's the fact that these HR teams that are often in charge of delivering the hardest news in someone's career, we know that's no easy task, but there's an emotional weight that HR carries, and it doesn't always get acknowledged. It often doesn't get acknowledged. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what are some ways that professionals can find support. And when I say professionals, I mean HR professionals, because so much of that weight falls on them to, and to your point, provide therapy that they're not qualified to provide, and still find their own support during these times.
Yeah. So it's a loaded question because there's a
Yes.
million answers and none of them are correct, right? Because it's, the answer that every consultant says is, well, it depends. And it really does, because
Yeah.
every HR team carries a burden, during these times. They're aware. So there's the pre-event burden of carrying around something that is going to negatively impact human beings' lives, right?
Yeah.
And when we start thinking about them as neighbors and people that live in our community, it really starts to feel heavy. Now, when we've become friends with people that we work with, because we like working with people we like to work with, right? We want to have
Yes, of
friends at
course.
work.
Yeah.
And then it starts to feel really heavy. And then the heaviness during the event itself, right, is a lot. And so one of the things that HR leaders can do, two things I'd say very practical. Making sure you're giving your team the space to not be working extreme hours, which puts your body under
Mhm.
physical stress. Our bodies need time to rest. Our minds need time to reset and rest. Think about if you've gotten 4 or 5 hours of sleep for 5 days in a row, you're a mess. I'm a mess.
Yeah.
I'm a mess after 2 days, right? And so, but you get a
Yeah.
good 8 to 9 hours of sleep and you're like, fresh human being, everything's great. And so you've got to give them that space and not say, well, you need to take a PTO day. If you're going through layoffs and somebody you feel is really on the edge, give them that day as a gift.
Yeah.
Okay. It should be in every leader's power to do that. And then the second thing is checking in with them. It's a quick coffee. How you holding up?
Yeah.
How are you doing? What's weighing on you right now? Let's talk it through. Not because I have answers, but I can listen. And
Yeah.
sometimes people just they don't know who to talk to. When we
Yeah.
were just going through the COVID layoffs, like it was this, our leader at the time would say, it's the Super Bowl of HR. We're doing everything right now, you
Yeah.
know, and everything
Yeah.
everywhere all at once. And so the input of information, feelings, emotions, guilt, all of that together is a lot. And so as leaders, we've got to be able to, take time out and look at our team as individuals and as humans and check in. How are you doing? Yeah. How
Yeah.
are things at home? And this is scary territory for a lot of people. They don't want to talk about personal stuff with their teams. And I would say, you really need to during these times. You've got to find a way to show up.
You had also mentioned when we were talking before today, obviously, about finding your community. So finding help
Yeah.
from experts to navigate that process. Talk to me a little bit about that because I think we forget about that, especially when we're dealing with, you know, confidential, super challenging moments where we're afraid to say too much. But at the same time, we need to unload on somebody and get some perspective. And particularly if this is not something you've had to navigate before, whether it's
Yeah.
at all or at this scale as an HR professional.
So it's interesting you bring that up because I think what happens to a lot of people that work in the corporate space is we get so entrenched in our company that we don't really do things with other people in other companies. And so we might attend the same conferences, we might, attend the same webinars, but are we in community? And I would challenge, every person on this, on this call today to ask yourself, do you have 3 to 4 people that you could just call and say, hey, I just need 10 minutes. I want to tell you what's going on in our world over here in HR. And I want to just ask you, do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah.
And these are your HR counselors in your life that give you perspective. So if you're a CHRO, you need to be networking with people at CPO, CHRO levels that are dealing with, same size, organizations, same stage of organizational growth, and get to know them.
Yeah.
Take them out to lunch or set up a virtual coffee and just say, hey, I just want to know you because I need more people in my life like you. There's built-in
Yeah.
community. SHRM has a bunch of built-in communities.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of a community called Transform. They do an
Yeah.
annual conference, but they've also got a community. It's free to join, and it's absolutely phenomenal. I've met some wonderful people through there, and having those people to be able to say, post something saying, hey, here's what we're dealing with right now, and have 3 or 4 people jump on immediately and say, I've experienced this. Give me a call.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
powerful, because you're not
Yeah.
doing it alone.
Yeah, it sounds like almost building your personal board of directors and
Yeah.
being very thoughtful about making sure some of those individuals aren't just somebody who you're aspiring to become like or something like that, or a personal friend also who understands the other side of you, but people who really work in the same space or in the same
Yes.
function who have gone through similar things. I agree. I think that's so incredibly helpful. Um, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your nuggets of wisdom. I love to hear from you. I love your insights. Now I'd love to hear from our audience as well. So for everybody who's on the call, if you haven't already, please feel free to submit your questions using the question pane. It should be in your upper right-hand corner. You can also access, by the way, the hidden costs of layoffs. That guide is also available there, and everyone will be receiving it in the follow-up email I'll send. We're going to try and answer as many questions as we can before we wrap up. Let's see. Let's start with this one. We tend to invest a lot in getting the right people in the door, and our company is getting better at supporting those who are laid off. But it seems a lot less planning and resources go into supporting those employees who remain behind. I think we've already kind of answered the question about how can you vie for the proper resources. But this individual is specifically asking if there's one thing that the company should do to support those remaining employees after layoffs. What would you suggest and why?
Yeah, it's a heavy lift.
Yeah.
New job descriptions.
Interesting. Please tell
I
me
want to
more.
reclassify what people are doing,
Mm,
because if they're taking on responsibilities that 2 other people were doing, that means
yeah.
that their volume output of those responsibilities is increased 3 times, and it may affect their compensation where they align. So if they're making
Mm,
$60,000 a year in a technical role, or customer oriented role, and suddenly they're taking on 200 more accounts, or they're taking on 30 more projects or 10 more projects, you know that scopes differently. And so
yeah.
I think when you go through that with your employees and you say, we've heard you, and we're readjusting, there may not be a comp adjustment, but at least you've got a reason why there's no comp adjustment, right? And in many
Yeah.
cases, you may have comp adjustments up, most likely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's one thing. It's a heavy lift. It's a huge.
It is.
AI makes it a lot easier, where you can literally, and I'm going to give you just some practical things. You can get an
Yeah.
AI note taker. You can do a one-on-one with somebody. And you say, "Tell me about what you do every day. What are
Yeah.
you working on?" And it just let them ramble. Let
Yeah.
AI sort it out for you to help really kind of graduate. What are the key things they're doing? What are the objectives? If you know enough about AI to build a template that can help you navigate through that, it's really, really simple.
Yeah. That's such a great shortcut that can really pay off in dividends, I'd have to say. Oh, we got a great question, and this is so interesting. This person asked this because one of the things that we were going to get to, but I kind of cut because I wanted to make sure we had time for questions, was that it's never just one event, it's this ongoing change. So this individual asked, what is your most important piece of advice for those of us in the wake of 3 RIFs in 18 months?
Oh.
That's rough. That's rough. And that can go so many directions. Yeah.
Yeah, the question you're asking is, when's the next one? Not if, it's when. 3 reductions in 18 months is a signal. It's a pattern. And so I think as an HR leader, you've got to have a real serious conversation with leadership to say, again, going back to the risk, brand value, employer value proposition, retention, these are all quality candidate attraction and retention. These are all significant risks when you experience 3 RIFs in 18 months. And so either, again, from a business conversation, how much are we willing to risk to do this? And, and typically what I've seen is that they didn't cut deep enough the first time. They didn't cut deep enough the second time. And so now, potentially they're deep enough. And so you've got to really analyze, are we deep enough? And, because at some point you've got to signal to the employee base, we're good. And
Yep.
now it's time to rebuild, right? And if it's constantly what's coming around the corner, nobody's going to feel good about rebuilding.
Yeah. I mean, I know this doesn't help this individual at this point, but I remember something that one of the organizations I was with, they made a very big point in the comms leading up to the layoffs that they were going to cut deep to try and avoid multiple rounds, and that they would reassess an X amount of time. I can't remember what we decided, but we were going to assess an X amount of time to determine could we bring anyone back, but we'd rather cut deep once and go through all of that than go through multiple rounds. Obviously not helpful in this particular situation, but for those of you out there where this is coming your way, this might be something to really talk to your leadership team about if that's possible.
But
Because it does.
To help out this person, what I would say, if you're sitting in the wake and you're sitting in an HR role, the first thing I would do is just is get clarity, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't really start communicating to people until you know that what you're communicating is truthful.
Yeah.
Right. So, we are positioned to no longer do headcount cuts now because of the last one. If that's truthful, great. I can now go talk to people. I can have the one-on-ones. We can get the managers talking, because we've got to give them a truth track, not a talk track. And so maybe that's what you could start doing today, is get the truth and then start the communication process.
Yeah, it's a good question. We
Yeah.
have another one here. How can HR trust the remaining employees' pulse checks if people are worried about their jobs and not responding truthfully to the surveys? So how do you get deeper if they're concerned that, I would be afraid of doing a pulse check if it's just a Slack poll or something like that. I can tell you've got some thoughts, Chris. Go for it.
So we do pulse checks all the time for our clients. And the question I always ask companies that do it is, what do you do with the data?
Oh.
How are you going back to the employees and saying, here's what you said, and here's what we're going to do to address it, and then follow back up with the employees saying, we heard you. Here's what we said we were going to do. We did it. Now we're going to do another pulse survey. You're building credibility, right? People
Mhm.
don't want to, people don't want to fill out those pulse surveys, accurately with real information because they don't trust you. They don't trust the leadership,
Yeah.
you know? And so, they don't trust if you say it's anonymous, they don't trust that it's anonymous,
Yeah. It's fair.
you know? If you don't do it anonymously, you better believe nobody's going to answer truthfully.
Mm.
So, what are you trying to do with the data? Not
Yeah.
just, oh, we want to get a pulse on our people. That's for you. That's serving you.
Yeah.
What's motivating them to give you real answers? And that's the action and the commitment that comes after it.
Yeah. Oh, this is it's the same person that was talking about the multiple RIFs that leadership is resistant to action the HR wants to take to help the org out. So, and as a result, employee morale is terrible, which, you know, I can understand that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the only thing that comes to mind is again, how can you create a business case around it? Because it seems like no one wants to listen to morale's tanked. They need to know how does that affect the bottom line?
No, and then they start saying, well, how are you going to fix it? You're the head of HR, right? I
Quickly.
mean, that's the,
Yeah.
if sales is tanking, who do you look at? You look at the head of sales. If the finances aren't in order, who do you look at? You look at the CFO. If the morale and the employee engagement, the culture is bad, who do you look at? The head of HR.
Yeah.
So again, I reframe this as HR has to show up as a business partner to the table, just like
Mhm.
all the other C functions. And if you don't know how to do that, that's okay. And here's what I'm going to tell you. Download a really good AI and work with it and help train your voice and say, I want to be seen as the best chief people officer, the best CHRO that has the business voice, even though I don't have the education or I don't have, or I don't have, or I don't have, or I don't have
Yeah.
all my mindset stuff that gets in the way of me speaking truth to other leaders. Help them create your talk track for you so that you feel comfortable
Yeah.
being that bold. But if you're always the order taker in the room and they're not willing to address the situation, it's because you haven't probably established the right level of buy-in from the leadership table of the function. And that's
Yeah.
okay because most leadership tables don't have that buy-in. And so it has been our job for as long as I've been in HR to try to make leaders recognize that value. And so it's on us to do it.
Yeah. No,
And I blame it
that's
back to the
totally
fact that
fair.
HR started as the personnel department. Yeah.
So clinical. That sounds
Years
so
ago.
that's awful. Well, I have to say, I know we could talk about this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, but unfortunately, we are out of time for today. For anyone who wants to continue the conversation, Chris and I are both available on LinkedIn. You can reach out to us. Again, for anybody who wants to learn more about Career Minds and how we support organizations through workforce change, and that includes career transition, that includes redeployment, outplacement. Straight up, we invite you to visit us at careerminds.com. Chris, thank you so much again for sharing your time and your perspective with all of us today. It's been a real pleasure and incredibly helpful. I hope it's been helpful to everyone else as well. Um, for everyone who's joined us, thank you so much. And please look for a follow-up email. It's going to come from me in about a day or two. It's going to include a link to today's full webinar recording, a copy of our latest report on the hidden costs of layoffs, and a complimentary copy of the Career Minds Essential Guide to Handling a Layoff. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us, and we hope to see you at a future event. Chris, thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you. It was great. Love talking with you. And again, if anybody wants to reach out to me directly to discuss further, I love talking about this. So
Love it. I love it. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.